Pennsylvania campus made the news again. After more than 2 weeks of an encampment where members of the community, the student body, even some faculty, according to some reports, had set up an encampment hoping to end the war against the Palestinians. On Friday, the police forced them out, and anywhere from 23 to 40 people, depending on what you read, were arrested, including 9 students, one of whom, I've forgotten her name, is an international student, and her ID card immediately lost all functions. I don't know how many of you have been on a campus recently. When I was in college, campus doors were wide open. Anyone could wander into the cafeteria, into the bookstore, into the library, into sometimes the dormitories had a little bit more security, but not always. Today, to get into any building on most college campuses, you have to have an ID and you have to buzz yourself in. The student, who is not one of us as a U.S. citizen, but studying here on U.S. soil, who had been protesting, desiring that her siblings in Palestine and her siblings in Israel have a better chance to live, was arrested. And her ID no longer works. She's locked out of her dorm. She is locked out of the cafeteria and the cafes and wherever else she can get food on campus. Her story in some ways sounds reminiscent to the story we heard about 1948, right? Dear God, not much has changed. And as always, we need your help. And in some ways, it matters not what land we are on. In some ways, it totally matters what land we are on, right? Anyone who has recently, in the last, 3 years, maybe even longer than that, who has attended a theatrical performance in the Milwaukee area has probably heard land recognition. We give thanks to all of the indigenous, the native peoples who were on this land, including the Potawatomi and the Ho-Chunk and a few others that I'm not going to remember this morning. I had them written down, but I forgot that paper at home. But we know that there were people here before we came and occupied the space. And we know that there is land and territory in Ukraine that is claimed by more than one country at various times in the world, right? And there's all sorts of other small countries, including, I have a friend from Estonia. That's one of the former Soviet countries that I tend to pay more attention to because I have a direct connection there, right? My friend was born there. A former Soviet nation, and when Ukraine was invaded, when the bombs first, that was the same day as Estonia's Day of Independence from the Soviet powers. Pretty much every Estonian would say that is not a coincidence. That is not a coincidence. God, we need your help. We need your peace. We need your love. In 1905, the first Mother's Day observation is said to have occurred. Now, like most history, it depends on who's telling the story as to what you hear, right? And usually the stories you hear are those of the conquerors, those who have won. A couple of months ago, we had a long line of people up front here in worship, and we read different scriptures and different quotes from people about various places, about the rights and the freedoms that we have in this country, and I have the right to be ignorant. As a woman with the skin the color, that gives me the right to be ignorant. And my teachers proved that to me because I learned about this much about Black history as I grew up. I learned even less about Asian history as I grew up. Until Ellen DeGeneres showed up, I had absolutely no idea that there was such a thing as LGBTQIA plus history. Other than that one gym teacher who might be gay. Nobody used those words when I was a kid. I grew up with the right to be ignorant, and let me tell you, I don't like it at all. The microphone apparently doesn't either, because it doesn't even want me to say those words. So many in our society. And my guess is that it doesn't matter what groups we identify with and belong to, we were all given the right to be ignorant about a whole lot of other people, right? And history is almost always written by the conquerors. We've had over the last decade or so, maybe even a couple of decades, a little bit more movement toward sharing the stories, as we heard this morning, of those who were forced off their land. But it's not an easy thing to get. It's really hard to get the stories of those who have died because they're already deceased. And so when the police, the military, the armed forces, whoever it is, come in and simply demolish a community, we don't get to hear those stories. They are buried with the bodies that lived those experiences. And back on May 9th, 1905, Anna Reeves Jarvis's mother died. And 3 years later, in 1908, she got together a group of people, a group of women at Andrews Methodist Episcopal Church to remember her mother. And in that gathering, every year she would gather the women around her into parlors and churches and social halls, and they would listen to sermons and they would read essays. They would sing hymns and pray. And they did this to promote peace. They were promoting peace. And in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson signed the bill that made Mother's Day officially to be recognized on the second Sunday in May. And as we know since then, it's become another commercialized holiday in a big kind of way, hasn't it? $25 million, I believe, was a few years ago spent on flowers, perfumes, and jewelry and other gifts for Mom. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because we should remember our moms, right? But one of the things we also need to do is remember why this holiday exists in the first place. A couple of different stories here, and I don't know that either of them are the story of the oppressor or the conquered. But there's the story about Anna Reeves Jarvis and her movement to getting Mother's Day observed. There's also the poet Julia Ward Howe, who we know as a lyricist, also, who wanted to promote the concept of Mother's Day of Peace as an anti-war movement. Sorry, moms. Not all about the restaurant meal that our families may have taken us to last night or will do today, or the we'll get, if nothing else, those up here in front of the altar. It's not about the jewelry or the phone calls or the text messages or the emails that we get from our kids, but rather it's a remembrance of love. Here on this ground, maybe not right here, but even right here, the Civil War was not yet distant memory. And this group of women were getting together to protest war. And even as oxymoronic as it sounds, to fight for peace, to promote peace. And who better to promote peace than mothers who give birth to all who fought and who died and who came home injured, who came home missing limbs or unable to move, or maybe with traumatic brain injuries and unable to think or to speak or to function in daily life. And these two stories connect because Anna Reeve Jarvis's mother, Anne, was part of that movement led by Julia Ward Howe. She agreed with these mothers who were getting together to promote and pray for peace. Not just here in the U.S., but unity among women across the globe in the wake of the trauma of the Civil War here in this country and Europe's Franco-Prussian War as well. And who better to promote peace, this group said, than the people who give life to all, who give life to all, period, right? But especially the soldiers who die, who gave their lives, and who came home injured. Not much has changed since 1905 or 1948, or dare we go back to the days that Jesus lived and walked this earth, where there were conquerors and there were the oppressed and those who lost, and the stories that never got told, the stories lost, the lives lost. And yet, in and through all of this is woven God's love. God's love. I have so loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love, Jesus says. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater commandment. How do we kill one another if we practice this love? How do we shut down another's voice if we are practicing this love? Unless, of course, the voice is spewing hate, in which case it's not love. But if it's somebody standing here like Lena or Sarah or Eleanor, sharing their lived experience, sharing their own personal stories, how is it that we shut those down? And yet we do, don't we? We want to hear what we want to hear. And everything else is simply white noise in the background. And Jesus says, I have loved you, so abide in my love. And love one another as I have loved you. We are called to love. And we know in this world things are slow to change. Jesus walked the earth. There was violence. In 70 AD, if Jesus lived to be 70, he would have seen the temple torn down. We know that there has been conflict and war throughout the world pretty much since the beginning of time. Then again, some of the stories that we know about all of the conflicts that have happened aren't necessarily as fact-based as we've been told. Some of the indigenous against indigenous fighting here on this continent was a simple way to say, those folks aren't like us. We are more civilized than them. Therefore, it's okay for us to take their land. Now, did they have? I'm sure they did. I love my family, and at the same time, we have conflicts in my family. Anyone else relate? We love our neighbors, most of them at least, and yet we have conflicts. And sometimes, although I love myself, I feel conflicted with inside myself, right? Life is not always easy. It is not necessarily just a forward path to where we want to go. And even with love of neighbor, life can be challenging at times. And Jesus reminds us, abide in my love because I love you. And the greatest commandment of all is to love your neighbor as you love yourself, as God first loved you. Way back in the early 1900s, we don't have a pure white carnation here. We're going to pretend. Oops. I chose one and another chose to be chosen. So I'll take the one that cried out that it wants to be chosen. We're just going to pretend. Perhaps from where you sit, this almost really white. It did from when I was sitting in the front row. It's got a little pink tinge. But the flower chosen for Mother's Day is the white carnation, because the carnation does not drop its petals. But as it is dying, it hugs its petals to its heart. So too mothers hug their children to their hearts, and a mother's love never dies. The white carnation is the carnation for this. Even as we hear the stories of pain, even as we hear the stories of disenchantment, oh my goodness. Yes, that word. Thank you. Even as we hear the stories of people ostracized and pushed aside, and we hear of their lives lost, we remember the carnation. Today, as a symbol of God's love that does not drop its petals. But even as Jesus died on the cross, hugged itself tighter to hug all of creation and all of God's children, because Jesus' love never dies. God, we need your help today. We live in a time, much like every other time throughout the world, where there is violence and bigotry and pain. We need your love. Send your love upon us all now, that we might abide in your love, and that we might go forth to love one another as you have first loved us. In Jesus' name, amen. Today,